before getting into practical applications from this entire study in the book of Revelation in particular for us today, I want to look at a couple examples of using Revelation as a schematic blueprint and framework for understanding history in between the two comings of Christ, how that applies to a couple historical scenarios. Now remember, I've said that the idealism approach, this idea of a schematic framework, means that the universal principles of these allegorical symbols will apply in a myriad of different ways at different times and different places throughout church history. So be clear that I'm not saying that the examples that I give from history are the meaning of the text. Rather, I'd say that the text is teaching general spiritual principles, and the examples that I'm going to give are applications of how those principles have played out in history, and that the lessons that we learn from history and how we interpret history, and how, if we'd been at these points in history, how we could have responded based on familiarity with these principles from Revelation. So I want to give, in particular, I have in mind a couple examples right now, both from the life of Constantine in the 4th century and the major change that happened as the Roman Empire transitioned from persecuting Christians to it being a established, declared Christian empire by the end of the 4th century. Now, Constantine gets a lot of slack. I don't think that all the ills of Christianity should be placed on him, but definitely there's the 4th century saw some major changes in the Christian landscape, and Rome was not the first empire to Christianize. The kings of Armenia and Iberia, not to be confused with the Iberian Peninsula over in Spain, but the region we call Georgia nowadays, north of Armenia, both of those kingdoms declared themselves Christian before Rome and Constantine did. But Rome, of course, is the most well-known one, and the one that gets the most attention in the historical books, and understandably, rightfully so. The New Testament story takes place within the Roman Empire, and so it's worthwhile for us to know the trajectory that took. And there's some huge changes from where Christians did for 3 centuries. Christians did not have a land to call their own, did not have a homeland, were persecuted by the beast of the sea and the harsh kingdoms of the world that seek to make war on the saints. And starting with the 4th century, Christians began to have a place they could call a homeland. At least some Christians, and many others did not and do not live in a place that is hospitable to Christian. That presents its own interesting challenges. How do you live? If we're meant to have Christian nations, what does that mean for people who don't live in Christian nations, who are now seen as not just religiously different, but potentially traitorous? If you are a Christian in Persia in the 5th century, after Rome has Christianized, and this neighboring kingdom is your arch enemy, now the Christians in Persia are seen as potential traitors, because maybe you are siding with our enemy Rome. Maybe you're going to go over to their side or betray us from within. Well, there's some big questions that come out of the Christianization of empires in the 4th century. So I want to look at two examples from history in light of Book of Revelation.